Good morning. This is Jason Moss with the Georgia Manufacturing Alliance and Manufacturing News Network. We have got a great call lined up for you today, and today we're going to be talking about legal issues for folks in the manufacturing community. We've got some really good friends with us from Taylor English Duma. Russ Dunlap is kind of our go-to guy at Taylor English. He's been involved with GMA for quite some time, and he leads. He works as a partner in the firm and leads the copyright and patent side of the house. So he'll give us a little bit of insight. If I butchered that, please fix it in just a second. But Russ again has been a great friend of ours, and he's been able to access and connect with a lot of the other folks in Taylor English to bring them on board to give us some insights about what's going on in the space. So with that being said, what I want to do, without any further ado, turn this over to Russ. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the kind of the game plan for today. I know you have gathered quite a few folks and what we're going to be covering today.
All right, great. Thanks, Jason. Like you said, I do patents and intellectual property, trademarks, trade secrets, all sorts of licensing issues. But you're not here to hear me speak today. Just a brief overview of the firm before I hand it off to Mitzi. We are a firm of about 180 attorneys now, about 150, I think, here in Atlanta. And we're built to, cover the needs of pretty much any size company. Manufacturers are one of our biggest client bases. From startups to very large companies, we really have attorneys that can fit all your needs. We were founded, oddly enough, on April Fool's Day 15 years ago in 2005, but the firm really exploded in 2008. Actually, during the last recession, we found that our model was built to handle these sort of economic situations, and the model that we have where we drive value to our clients and really focus on the relationship between the attorneys and the clients has really helped help our clients, especially in times of need like this one. So without further ado, I will hand this off to Mitzi Hill. She's the head of our coronavirus task force. So she's going to give a brief update on what's going on at the state and federal level. And also on the call is Christina Moore and Greg Schultz. Christina will be talking about the SBA loans issues under the CARES Act and the paycheck protection programs and things like that. And Greg Schultz will be talking about some real estate issues, from the rent abatement and lease obligations for landlords and tenants. We had a few questions last week that were directed towards that. So I reached out to Greg to see if he could get on the call and talk about that. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Mitzi, and she can lead us off.
Perfect. Good morning, Mitzi.
Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's had a good week. All things considered, it's nice to see you again, and I appreciate coming back. I'm going to be very brief. We went over in very high level, no detail last week, the PPP and other loans, and that's what Christina's going to cover in detail today. She's our subject matter expert. Russ asked me to give a brief update on sort of what's happening at the federal and state level as we look at where we are in this crisis. As I'm sure everyone is very familiar, the governor on Friday put in place an order that purports to shut down everything but critical infrastructure businesses in the state and essential activities for individuals. The critical infrastructure list is pretty lengthy. It's driven by federal guidelines, and it includes most manufacturing that can be characterized as supply chain for any of the 16 critical infrastructure industries. And those industries span healthcare, food, energy, water, transportation. I mean, there is a lot. And so if you have questions about whether you are in the supply chain for any of the critical infrastructure and therefore can remain open and fully operational, we're happy to help with that. For companies that are not considered critical infrastructure or supply chain, the governor left some leeway to determine whether you can remain open to conduct what he called minimum business operations. That's generally going to be things like making sure your payroll is processed, making sure your property and your inventory are secured. But he also left some wiggle room that some of our clients have been taking advantage of to remain open to the public and to provide services. I think that's going to be a case-by-case kind of call. And as this crisis goes on in time, the flexibility may not be quite so flexible to continue those minimum business operations. But for now, we think there is a little wiggle room, even if you're not critical infrastructure. And so again, if you have questions about that, we are happy to help. And we'll also note that in both cases, whether you're open as critical infrastructure supply chain or whether you're conducting minimum business operations, the governor has put in place a mandatory list of health and safety measures that you must be able to follow in order to remain open. And it's pretty lengthy. It's, I think, 16 items for the critical infrastructure side and 20 items for the minimum business operations side. So we can help with any of that. We don't know whether he will extend that order. It is due to expire on the 13th. You may have seen news about 20 minutes ago that he has extended the state of emergency for Georgia. That is not the shutdown order. That is something that has to do with our ability to claim federal money, basically, because we are in a state of emergency. But he has not yet extended the shutdown order, and we don't have any intel that I'm aware of as to whether he will. So that's briefly the state level and the shutdown order. DC, what is happening there? The PPP program launched on Friday. I hope that you all had a better track record than the average business seems to have on Friday. We all know that a week to get a $350 billion loan program up and running is not a lot of time, and the rollout reflected that. It was both oversubscribed in many cases with the banks that were ready to receive applications, and it was overwhelming to many other banks who were not yet ready to receive applications. I think Congress got that message loud and clear. So did the Fed. They are both working on measures that will ease the administrative burden or ease the concerns of banks that have been reluctant to try to open up the lending process. The Fed announced Monday that it will buy these loans basically from any lending bank. And so that should ease the concerns of any small banks, for example, about carrying low interest loans from businesses that they don't normally know well, because they can basically put them to the Fed for cash. So that's one measure that has come out in the immediate aftermath of this rollout. The other measure that is not in place yet, but that is already being kicked around, is that after the rollout Friday, Congress started talking about, we need more money, because it was so clear that demand was going to be so high for these loans. As Monday rolled on, and so they were talking about, we'll do that when Congress comes back into session at the end of this month. As Monday rolled on and it became clearer and clearer how high the demand is, Congress has started talking about authorizing more money as early as this week. The leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, would like to have a vote on it up to an additional 200 or 250 billion with a B in funding as early as tomorrow. We'll see whether they are able to get that put in place. But again, if they can get that money authorized quickly, that should help ease some of the logjam at the banks, both because there will be more money for them to give out and because they will be a little less nervous about giving out money. Regardless of what happens this week on additional funding for the PPP itself, we know from the lobbyists and some of our own elected representatives that Congress is very attuned to the issues that are facing both small and large businesses, as well as individuals over the coming months. It is clear that this is going to be a longer term problem than was initially anticipated when Congress started writing the CARES Act, whatever it was, 3 weeks ago. And so they are already floating ideas for what the next round of legislation will look like when they come back at the end of this month. We have heard that there will be, through the news, we have heard, and through other sources, we have heard that there may be an additional stimulus payment for individuals, that there will be additional funding for the SBA loans, which is part of what they seem to be accelerating to talk about this week, and that there may be support as well for the larger businesses who have, even under the CARES Act, a $450 billion fund that hasn't yet been tapped because we're still waiting on guidance from the Treasury about that. So more money coming for the SBA, probably more money coming for larger businesses, loans still to be tapped under the CARES Act for those larger businesses, and maybe stimulus, additional stimulus for individuals. We'll see what form those take. So that's the big picture, and I'm going to hand it off to our subject matter experts so you can hear about the specifics of the PPP loans and the latest guidance that has come out of the Treasury Department and the SBA, and then the landlord-tenant issues. Thanks very much, and everybody stay safe.
Great update, Mitzi. I sure appreciate that. Good stuff. All right, and I think we're going to bring on Christina. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, Mitzi, thank you so much. And hopefully everybody on the call can get a good picture from Mitzi that she, in my world, is a very reliable news source and has filtered all the information in such a concise way and getting to the specific good details that you want to know. I basically go to Mitzi for my news now. Thank you, Mitzi. And then thank you everyone for having us join you. One question, Mitzi, which I think you'll know the answer to, is do you know how or what date Kemp extended the emergency, the declaration of emergency for the state to?
It's a month, and so I think it goes through, I don't know. I'll find out while we're on the call.
Okay. So that'll be a relevant point that I'll start with. We've got two loan programs with, I'll say, this economic disaster. Both have kind of provisions tied to it under the CARES Act, but one is kind of separate in and of itself, and that is an EIDL. So I'm going to talk about an EIDL and PPP. So EIDL is Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and a PPP is the loan program under the CARES Act, which is Paycheck Protection Program. So first, the EIDL, you can apply for directly through the SBA, and our state falls under the ability to get an EIDL because the governor has declared it a state of emergency. Or I'm not sure if that phrasing is right, but basically you can get it for as long as they've extended our state's declaration of emergency. An EIDL is, right now they've got a 3.75% interest rate and a 30-year term. There, you'd go right, like I said before, directly to the SBA website. When you go to the SBA website, you don't enter an amount of the loan that you want. Basically, you put in some key information, maybe 5 items based on your operating costs, your expenses, basic pieces of information on your business, and then you put that to the SBA, and the SBA will determine what loan amount you can get. Then the CARES Act also added onto an EIDL the ability to get up to a $10,000 grant with an EIDL, and the grant would not be repayable under the CARES Act provision. So when you go online with the SBA, you click, you want to submit for an EIDL, you literally check a box saying, yes, I want to be considered for a grant of up to $10,000. And they're supposed to be issuing that grant. They said within 3 days of application, but I'm not sure. No, I don't know anybody that's received grant money yet. So I question whether it's within 3 days of acceptance of an application by the SBA. Honestly, I'm not sure. Because I don't know anyone that's received money yet, and I know they've submitted more than 3 days ago. But you can receive a grant under the CARES Act with an EIDL of up to $10,000. That grant is not repayable, as in you don't have to repay it. These loans, there is a threshold where you would have to give some collateral on these loans, and I've seen different numbers on the threshold. I've seen one number, I think was 25. If the loan is greater than 25,000, you've got to give collateral. But then I've also seen another number was if it was greater than 50,000. There's no prepayment penalty. So if you were to go apply for this loan because you wanted to get the grant and then repaid it the next day, you could do that. If you're denied the loan, you do not have to repay the grant. The grant is yours without kind of repayment obligations, regardless of whether you're denied the loan or say you repay it the next day. So that's the one option that's available. Once again, that's 30-year term on an EIDL at 3.75% interest rate. Then the next kind of loan option is under the CARES Act is the Paycheck Protection Program loans. Those loans are generally available to businesses with less than 500 employees or that qualify as a business under an SIC code or the standard industry code that the SBA has put out. Now, one nuance to all of this is there are affiliation rules in place, except for basically restaurant industry or franchise. They've waived affiliation rules for those two industries. The affiliation rules generally say that depending on elements of control or management, you would have to count other entities that are kind of under you or control you. And this gets into a complicated analysis of if someone qualifies as an affiliate to you, and then if they qualify as an affiliate, you have to count their employees. So if you have questions on affiliation, that's definitely something you should reach out to counsel on. I do know that you could put, you could in a good faith, put the information in an application and then put it to the SBA lender to determine if you're eligible or if the affiliation rules are triggered. But you might have the SBA lender say, we don't know how to rule on that because so many of us are trying to, attorneys, borrowers, lenders are trying to figure out what is the intent or what is the meaning. Because as Mitzi said, there's a lot going on with the changing landscape, and that means they're coming out with guidance almost daily, changing or nuancing or re-explaining some aspect of the CARES Act. For example, the CARES Act provisions under the PPP loan initially said it'll be up to a 4% interest rate with up to a 10-year term. We now have guidance that it's going to be a 1% interest rate at a 2-year term. So that's just an example of how things are kind of constantly changing. Obviously, that sounds pretty good, and that probably changed to your advantage. But there's other things that are not necessarily changing to your advantage where they're giving clarification. So let me go over a PPP, kind of the loan and process, so that you have a general understanding of that, but understand there's some nuances as to how you count affiliates and that sort of thing. So generally, PPP loans are available for businesses with 5.
Russ, I think we might have lost Christina. I saw she had some network challenges. Russ, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Christina, are you there?
Yeah, I think we've lost Christina. Stand by just a second. Let me cast the spotlight. Okay. All right. So Christina will be back in just a minute, I would assume. But we've got a variety of resources that are available as she's coming on board. I'm gonna stand by just a second. I'll share my screen and show you guys how you can access some of this information. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so stand by. I'll share my screen. Okay, so one of the things that we have done as an organization is we want to make sure we built a resources page, and from the homepage, I mean, you guys have found the events. Obviously, you're on the event. We're glad to have you plugging in there. But under the news tab, this is I want to share with you kind of how this is set up as Manufacturing News Network. This gives you a quick overview of the organization. On here, there's two pieces I wanted to share with you. One is this free resources button. I'll show you where you can navigate to that as well on a different page. But down at the bottom, this is an archive of all of the videos of the town halls, the roundtables, and the interviews that we've done. We've done quite a few, and you can go view older posts as well. We've got a nice library of content and information that's on here. We interviewed Bluebird Bus and Variable and Lieutenant Colonel Waldo Waldman and FSI, Leggett Platt, Daniel Defense. These are some really cool, pre what pre-shelter in place videos that we put together. I think that you guys could gain some information on. Just a second, I'm going to admit these two guys. But this is the information that, like I said, all the information is found here. One of the other places that you can find that data, and we're going to add some more to it, over on the coronavirus resources button under the news tab. This is a list of a handful of the law alerts that have been provided by Taylor English, and we really appreciate you guys putting these things together. But this coronavirus impact page will give you updates as they post them, so you don't have to wait on us to get the information and then repost them. You can find it live on that page, and you guys have done a fantastic job of building some great resources in that. So again, this is a way that you can access some of this data, and I know a lot of the information that Christina was sharing can be found on here as well. So I'm gonna stop the share and see if we got Mr. Christina back. I believe we probably do. Christina, can you hear us okay? All right, stand by. Hold on just a second, guys. We got a little technical hiccup here, but we're gonna get there. Christina, can you hear us okay? All right, stand by just a second, guys. Stand by just one more minute. Okay, Russ, I know you're trying to get Christina back on the line. I know, Mitzi, maybe you could kind of, I don't know if you could pick up sort of where Christina was off. She was going over the qualifications on the PPP. I think
I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're good? Okay.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, I just wasn't there anymore.
I got you.
All right. So generally, PPP is 500 or less employees, and then, or you could fall under the SIC code, which might allow for a greater number of employees because you qualify as a small business already in the eyes of the SBA. Then with the PPP loans, you can get your loan value is determined by your payroll costs. Your payroll costs are generally kind of what you pay employees, salary, wages, commissions, or other compensation. You can also include medical insurance premiums that you pay for your employees, retirement benefits, state or local taxes assessed against that you pay for a person or your business. Those are the general requirements or the general items that are payroll costs. And that is then multiplied, so you get an average monthly amount, and then you multiply that times 2.5%. That would create your maximum loan value. The PPP applications I've seen are typically 2 to 3 pages, and you're putting in, your average monthly amount, and then literally multiplying it times 2.5% and putting in that other amount. That's your maximum loan value you can obtain with a PPP loan. Then once the loan is originated or issued and it's funded, an 8-week clock starts to tick at that point. During the 8-week clock, they're going to look at your payroll cost expenses, which are the same things that they just calculated for maximum loan value. You're also going to get to add in your mortgage interest expense, either real or personal property interest expense, your rent obligations, and your utility costs. And they're going to take those 4 buckets and create your forgiveness amount. So during the 8-week period, they will add up those amounts and determine your amount of forgiveness, whatever those amounts add up to. Now, keep in mind, they can offset your forgiveness amount by a reduction in employees. That's calculated based on who you had employed during the 8-week period versus, and they look at 2 different calendar periods at the decision of the borrower to see if you've reduced your employees or if you've reduced their pay by more than 25%. So your forgiveness amount can be offset by those 2 calculations / lookbacks. So you will submit all sorts of paperwork supporting your debt forgiveness calculation with those 4 buckets to your SBA lender. They'll take it all in. They'll make sure if you had any reduction in employees or reduction in payroll cost to employees, they'll offset your forgiveness amount, and then they'll issue the forgiveness on the loan. So they will basically take the original loan value and reduce it by the forgiveness portion. And then your term will start at that point. It'll be a 2-year term at right now they're saying a 1% interest rate for whatever is remaining on the balance of the loan. These loans have no personal guarantee, no collateral. They're non-recourse loans. They're guaranteed by the SBA. If you went and obtained a grant under an EIDL, you would have to offset your forgiveness by the amount of the EIDL grant. You can also have both an EIDL and a paycheck protection loan. You could have both. But if you use the EIDL to pay things for payroll costs, then they're going to ask you to refinance the EIDL into a payroll protection loan. You could also elect to refinance the EIDL into a payroll protection loan. So you can have both, but in certain circumstances, depending on how you use the funds, you'll be asked to refinance your EIDL into the payroll protection loan. Unlike EIDLs, the payroll protection program needs to go through an approved SBA lender. You don't file directly with the SBA, although the SBA, while they've provided minimum underwriting requirements, they do appear to be looking over and approving the loans. I have heard some clients have gotten denied and they're having to redo calculations or redo documentation for the loan. So the SBA is looking at it. Let me see what else. These are pretty broad. And like I said, I feel like the trickiest part seems to be the affiliation rules to see if your number of employees has increased. The other big thing to pay attention to is if your SIC code allows you to have more than 500, then you still qualify for this loan. So you might not be not eligible. If you just look at the basic wording and say, oh, well, I have more than 500 employees, that might be okay. Mitz, can you think of anything else that I didn't talk about that you think this group wants to definitely hear?
No.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay.
Who's joining us on the question? Stand by.
Oh, yeah. One other thing I just remembered. Under the CARES Act, there are also provisions relating to payroll credits or refunds, and also the ability to defer your payroll payments or delay them. You cannot do those provisions under the CARES Act and still obtain a PPP loan. You cannot defer your payroll credit payments or delay them and or receive the benefits under the CARES Act for the payroll credits and still get a PPP loan. You can get those benefits under the Families First Act and still get a PPP or a 7A loan. Your amounts that you receive from the Families First payroll credits will offset your forgiveness piece though.
Perfect. I think we had a question calling in.
Yeah, I do. Can I ask you to explain again the EIDL grant? Is that being offset against the PPP in order for forgiveness? Or if you use part of the EIDL for payroll?
That's right. Right, good. So no matter what, you can have the 2 loans, but no matter what, if you receive a grant under an EIDL, that's going to reduce your amount of forgiveness. Now, it's not a reduction in that you didn't get it. They're just saying you can't double dip. You can't have, let's say they come up with an amount of $10,000 grant, and which is not repayable, and 100% of forgiveness for the 8-week period. They're just going to reduce your forgiveness piece by whatever amount you have already received. So you just can't double dip on the grant / piece of forgiveness that relates to the EIDL loan.
So keeping really good record.
Does that answer your question?
Well, my question is, EIDL is for operating expenses, to put it bluntly, and PPP for payroll. Are you saying all of EIDL will be offset, or only if you use it for payroll?
The only portion of the EIDL that will be offset will be the grant. So the EIDL will be a loan, and just the grant or grants you receive will be the only piece that's not repayable.
And the
And
grant
again,
is
that can be up
$10,000.
to $10,000.
Okay, cool. Okay, great.
Up to 10. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And you are correct, though. The EIDL has a bit broader uses where the paycheck protection loans are really specific to use for payroll costs, in mortgage or personal property interest on debt, utilities, and rent payments. To the point of keeping really good records that Jason, briefly stated, I absolutely recommend if you are getting either or both loans that you establish a separate account for those funds, and you do a very good job accounting for where those funds were used. Because if there's any, if they do end up having a lot of oversight or review of these, you're going to want to be able to establish those facts as for where the funds were used and how they are accounted for.
Perfect. That's great information, Christina. I definitely appreciate that. That gives us a good insight. I mean, best overview I've heard so far. And excuse me. And we're learning every day. I mean, I'll give you my experience, just tell you kind of how it worked in my world. I bank with several banks, but primarily with Synovus. And I was on a Georgia Chamber of Commerce call, and the labor commissioner, I think that was on the call, they suggested go apply immediately for the $10,000 grant, the EIDL grant. I went, followed the rules, clicked on the button on Tuesday, and it has been the longest 72 hours since last Tuesday that I've ever seen. I don't know about you guys, but I hadn't got any response or any feedback. I think I filled out the paperwork right, but if I missed it, again, I hadn't got any kind of input at all based on the $10,000 grant application that I made. I think it was either Tuesday or Wednesday of this past week. That was supposed to have been fully funded within 72 hours, but I mean, we all have to be gracious and we have to be understanding, and we know that, nothing like this has ever been done before. So we just kind of roll with it. We went through and applied for the PPP, filled out all the paperwork they said that the loans are going to be available on Friday. And at 6:30 on Friday, I got an email that said, hey, the loans are available at 6:30 Friday evening. The loan application is now available online through Synovus, and went in and filled all the stuff out. Fortunately, I got a fantastic team that helps us with our payroll, Smart Payroll Solutions, and Shruti and her team gathered all the information that I needed, put it all in, submitted it Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. I was thrilled that Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, I got feedback that said, you need to add this. And then I added that. And then they said, there's a piece on the form that you didn't fill out, which it didn't allow me to the first time. So I filled out all that. So I went back through like 3 iterations of that, got all the paperwork filled out on the application, got all my attachments done. And then on Sunday, they said that there's one more piece that I needed. So added that one more piece, got it all done. Monday morning, I got an email that said your calculations were wrong because on the official loan application that gets submitted to the Small Business Administration, there's a calculation that says, what is your payroll, your average payroll times 2.5%, times 2.5 equals your possible loan amount. Now, in the application and all the supporting documents, it says give 2 months of all of your expenses and how you're going to use the money for your rent and your utilities and your payroll. And so come up with that number. 2 totally different numbers, weren't connected at all. So on the application, the only thing that you can put in there, you can't put your rent or your interest or utilities. It can only be your average payroll times 2.5 or it gets kicked back. If that number doesn't match, they kicked it back to me, and I had to make one more change on it Monday. And, so that's kind of where we're at, just to give you guys a little bit of an update. Sometimes it helps to get a real world application who's done it. And that's been my experience. Has anybody else got any different experiences? But
real quick, if I could jump in, and thank you for sharing your experience, because I think it's been great for me to hear what's actually what people are experiencing. And for example, I'm on the board of my children's preschool. I filed for them, so I felt like, oh, now I can speak with some sort of knowledge of how this actually goes. But one thing I do want to note is that in guidance that the SBA came out with, because they're still changing rules and they're changing things like, at one point you could include independent contractor compensation. Now they're saying, no, you can't.
Right.
They did issue guidance, maybe Tuesday night. I get all my days mixed up, but this week saying that if you filed an application and that it is appropriate and acceptable that you file an application based on the guidance at hand at that time. And that if guidance changes and the loan is already in process or already moved through the chain, you do not have to go back through and amend it. Now, does that mean they're going to amend it on the back end? They didn't state that, but they basically said if you've made a good faith belief in your filing based on the guidance at hand, that's acceptable. So if anyone is on that call, this call that's already gone and filed and finds out, oh shoot, well, I didn't know that, let it run
Roll
through.
with it. Yeah.
They're saying, don't go back, slow things down. They are saying that if you made a filing based on guidance at hand, that's appropriate.
That's cool. That's cool. And I think that the communication is key, and that's great to hear that because I'd hate for anybody on this call to go back in and reset the clock because they're inundated obviously. And I've been thrilled with Synovis's feedback for us. They've been really engaged. Who's working my application has done a great job and been very engaged in the conversation. So I'm thankful of that. But again, we just need to be as patient as we can through this stuff as we go. Has anybody else got any other experience with the PPP or the EIDL? I never imagined GMA was going to be getting in this level of conversation about finance and business, and but we're trying to provide the questions that are that are coming up for our team. All right. Does anybody else got any questions about that specifically? All right.
I do.
Yes.
So you applied for the 10K grant, but Christina said it was a box that you checked off at the EIDL application. So were you able to do that without applying for EIDL, or did you have to do both at the same time?
Correct. It was a $10,000 grant application on the front end. So it was, it was a real simple, it was, basically your company, what your sales were, what your cost of goods were, how many employees and what's your payroll. Outside of that, you click a box and it was pretty straightforward. Maybe I got the short form when I went in there, but it was pretty quick to apply for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
and Jason, just to clarify, so the EIDL, it's a loan application
right.
that has a grant component of it.
Yep.
So just to be clear, it's not a grant application. You're applying for a loan
Correct.
that you could repay. You don't, you got to take it and repay it the next day,
right.
but that has the grant element to it. And it is really simple. And you literally just check a box within that application saying, yeah, I want to be considered for up to $10,000 grant.
Yeah. Has anybody on the call received that 10,000 or know of anybody that's received that grant to date?
I do not.
Okay. That helps.
And the only thing I've seen come out is that you get a application number at the point you click submit. I've not heard anyone has gotten a communication. Now I have heard some people that filed for an EIDL prior to the CARES Act implementing the grant portion of an EIDL.
Mm-hmm.
I heard some of those people have gotten a message saying, hey, if you went and filed before the CARES Act, instituted the up to the $10,000 grant, go back and refile. It wasn't even, we're updating your application or do you want to update it? They basically, I think, based on what I've heard, thrown all the applications out that were pre the CARES Act grant portion. Okay. And told those people, I've heard they've told those people to refile.
Okay.
But like I said, all that I've heard you get is an application number after you click submit. And I don't know anyone that's gotten a communication since then.
Right. Yeah. That's pretty consistent for what I've experienced. So, all right, guys. Well, one of the things I did want to kind of open this thing up. We got about 5 to 8 more minutes. We'll kind of keep this. What other questions do you guys have as it relates to the topics that we've covered so far? Cool. Anybody got any questions on that? And I want to open it up to Russ as well. I know we. Okay. All right, Russ, have we got Greg on the line with us?
Yeah, I believe so. He was having some technical difficulties with his computer, but I believe he is called in.
Okay.
And I think Greg is listed as a participant, so I think that's him.
Okay.
Um,
Cool. Greg, if you want to unmute, we'd love to have you join us. Stand by. There you go. Looks like you unmuted there.
Okay. You can hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.
Great.
We gave you
Sorry
kind of a
about that.
short fuse on this, so sorry
Yeah,
about that.
that's fine. That's fine. So obviously, in light of the pandemic and the shutdown orders, businesses have had problems accessing their locations of business, and most businesses are tenants under leases. And so many tenants are obviously looking for relief, any relief that may be available under their leases. Despite the many orders that are in place, that are essentially shelter in place and that have affected the operations of businesses, leases are enforceable documents. Absent state law changing the terms of the leases, they are enforceable documents. Obviously that leads to a question of, are there provisions in the leases that might give me some relief? Now, before I go to that, let's talk a second about the practical things that I'm seeing from landlords and tenants. And the most significant or common thing I've seen are requests for a 3-month to 4-month deferment of rent. Typically, I think tenants understand they're not going to, in most cases, get a full abatement of rent for this period. There are a few tenants out there. There's a national tenant, a mattress retailer, that within the first week or so of this thing sent a letter to all of its landlords and requested essentially 3 months of free rent, or I think it was 6 months of half rent, something like that, and basically gave a check the box amendment to the lease. And, it was a fairly cheeky approach to the landlords. But apart from that, most tenants are looking for, 3 months of deferment. And frankly, what I have seen is many landlords are open to that idea and are tending to work with their tenants. And so if there is a 3-month deferment, then typically that money would need to be paid by the end of either 2020 or 2021. I think 2020 is probably going to be a little early for most tenants. And what I think landlords are trying to do is, and everybody's trying to do, is see how long this is really going to last. And, if we're all out, starting to operate again in June or July, God willing, that, maybe 3 months deferment is sufficient. If this thing really drags on, who knows, right? So it's a little bit of an open-ended thing. But for right now, what I'm seeing mostly is a 3 to 4 month request for deferment, and paying that money back by the end of 2021. A few times I've seen examples where the rent that's deferred would simply be added to the end of the lease term. So it would essentially be like a balloon payment at the end of the lease term. And the other thing I'm seeing is landlords, if they're offering these concessions, they're asking that the tenants participate in all the relief that's available through the Paycheck Protection Plan or the CARES Act or whatever, the things we've been talking about. They want that to be a condition of giving relief to the tenant, that the tenant is actually seeking all the relief from the federal government that's available. So the other thing to remember is, in terms of an actual amendment to the lease, many landlords have construction financing or loan financing in place, and most loan agreements with lenders require that the landlord to get lender consent before amending or revising leases. So it may not be an instantaneous thing. If you're approaching your landlord about a deferment, they may have to check with their lender, and it may take a little bit of time. Now, we are lawyers, and so we need to talk about some of the legal provisions in leases that might offer some relief. The force majeure provision is the most common provision I think we've all been looking at and hearing about. Unfortunately, in most leases, and although frankly, virtually all leases, there is an express carve out in a force majeure provision for monetary obligations under a lease. So even though there may be broad language in that force majeure provision regarding acts of God, strikes, government actions, sometimes even pandemics or viruses, typically there's going to be an express carve out for monetary obligations. So tenants, in my experience, are not going to effectively be able to rely on that provision. Now, as a caveat, of course, everybody needs to review their documents or have someone review their documents for them. We can't make too many broad statements and assumptions. But from the leases I have seen and from the documentation I've seen and people talking about it, writing about it, blog posts, et cetera, I haven't seen anybody who frankly has gone the other direction on that issue. So now, if there are construction obligations, those are the sorts of things that a force majeure provision might actually help. So if you're a landlord trying to deliver space, or a tenant even trying to deliver space under a sublease, or if you have some other non-monetary obligation owing to a landlord, then perhaps the force majeure provision would help you there. Another provision that comes up is a continuous use or go dark provision. And this is the most common for retail leases, where landlords have a strong interest in tenants remaining open. In a manufacturing capacity, I'm not sure that landlords would typically have such a provision in your lease. It typically applies to multi-tenant, shopping centers and power centers, things like that. But it's something to think about. If you have a provision like that, you probably need to notify your landlord and just tell them, obviously, what's going on. If you are not an infrastructure, critical business infrastructure or supply chain business, then you have a really good reason not to be open, other than to perform minimum business operations. Another provision is the quiet enjoyment provision. This is a very common provision in a lease that essentially obligates a landlord to not disturb the tenant's possession during the term of its lease. If the landlord decides to shut down your facility, and this would most typically apply in a multi-office building or possibly a warehouse with multiple tenants. Arguably, that would be a breach of the covenant of quiet enjoyment. But if, as we have under the current circumstance, we have a statewide order, a shelter-in-place order, and only essential businesses are able to operate, then I think that's going to be a difficult argument to make vis-a-vis your landlord. Another provision is if there's an access to premises and availability of services covenant in the lease. So if the landlord is essentially closing the building, that's similar to what I just talked about, but this could be a little bit different. If the tenant can't even get access to its building, then maybe there's some arguments there. Again, and a lot depends on whether this is the landlord's decision or a state decision. Some of these things, I actually issued a client alert on this a few weeks ago, and the client alert was issued before Governor Kemp's most recent order. So some of this is a little bit dated. I think now that we have a shelter-in-place order, it's really hard to make some of these arguments, frankly, as to your landlord. Business interruption insurance is something that we've also seen a good bit of discussion about, which arguably is applicable here. Under a typical commercial general liability insurance policy, for there to be property damage coverage, there needs to be typically physical injury to tangible property. And under the current circumstances, when you have simply pandemic, you have lack of access to your business or your property to operate your business, it's a bit of a stretch to argue that's physical injury to tangible property. I've seen some commentators talk about the presence of the virus on services potentially being physical injury. I think it's a bit of a stretch. The other thing that's very relevant is most of the business interruption policies that are out there. There's a 2005 ISO Insurance Services Office exclusionary endorsement, which essentially excludes coverage for pandemics and viruses. So, however, I will say this: I have seen several lawsuits filed in the last 2 weeks. There's one in New Orleans, and I think there's one in the Upper Midwest. And in those cases, there was no 2005 ISO exclusion for viruses and pandemics. So again, as with leases, you'll just need to look at your specific insurance policy, talk to your insurance broker. Our firm does quite a bit of insurance coverage work, as we do a lot of broad business work. If you'd like to talk to any of us, we'd be happy to help you there. But the long and the short on that is, potentially coverage, but again, probably a bit of a long shot. The other thing I would mention is litigation. In litigation, there's nothing in terms of a landlord enforcing remedies. Let's say this thing goes on and a tenant is not able to pay rent for 2 or 3 months. Can a landlord start eviction proceedings? There is no current stay on that process. However, the Georgia Supreme Court has extended answer deadlines by 30 days, and frankly, just I think it was yesterday extended for another 30 days. So if a landlord were to commence proceedings quickly, and frankly, what we're hearing from sheriffs is sheriffs don't even, at least in Fulton County, don't even want to serve papers right now. So even though the courts are open and a dispossessory potentially could be filed, you know, practically speaking, I'm not sure service could be perfected to start the clock. But even if the clock was started, we now have a full 60 days from March 13th through May 13th to extend answer deadlines. So if all that were to happen, you'd at least have through May 13th to take your next step. Obviously, you wouldn't want to wait that long before engaging counsel and planning a defense and a response. But hopefully, you know, we're not going to see tons of that, because I think people are all kind of in the same boat together. And I hope landlords and tenants are going to be able to negotiate and avoid a lot of that ugliness. I will just mention one other thing real quick, is that in several states, there are statewide orders or legislation, I should say, that is either enacted or is under discussion to completely stop evictions, even at the commercial level, for some period of time. New York has something like that going on, and I think New Jersey and I believe California has some as well. So something like that could happen in Georgia. Hasn't happened yet, but anyway, that's about all I've got on that.
All right. Fantastic, Greg. I really definitely appreciate that information. And Greg, what was your last name again? Make sure we get that properly spelled.
Sure. Greg Schultz, SCHULTZ. I'm one of the leaders of our commercial real estate practice. I've been at the firm about 15 years. Christina is in our department, and we've done probably, you know, $3 billion worth of deals in the last 5 years, and we're very active in all asset classes, including industrial.
Okay. Fantastic. All right. Who's got the first question on the real estate side of the house? Anybody got any specific questions they'd like to ask? Oh, we got the man on the line with us. All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
So Georgia State does not have a stay on the eviction notice yet? I mean, landlords can still evict, or mortgages can be foreclosed on, homes can be foreclosed on?
Well, I'm really focused on the commercial side. I believe on the residential side, Fannie and Freddie have issued guidelines, moratoriums on pursuing remedies against borrowers right now. But on the commercial side, there is no blanket order that would stop a dispossessory. Like I said, there are some practical hurdles for landlords there, but there is no order, you know, establishing a moratorium on commercial real estate evictions.
Okay, and what is your March 13th through May 13th? What has Georgia Court?
So the Georgia.
I didn't get that.
Yeah. So I did cover that a little fast. So our Supreme Court basically stayed all judicial proceedings for a 30-day period. That was through March 13th, and I believe it just yesterday that was extended through May 13th. So if there's active litigation going on, or if it were commenced, there would be some slippage in dates.
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic.
Sure.
All right, great. And I know we got Mike McShane on the line. He had contributed some information, documentation, I think, that will be helpful in some of this area as well. A little tight on the timeline to be able to get everything put together for this call. But excuse me, next week we are going to be doing another legal overview. We're going to mix up the topics a little bit. Just keep an eye on the event details, on the topics and the bullet points. We don't have all those nailed down yet. We're trying to keep this really fluid. So if you have specific things that you'd like to get covered that we have not gone over, I know we've hit pretty hard this PPP and EIDL over the last couple of calls. We're going to do one more call sort of as a wrap, hopefully tomorrow on the finance side, and we're going to bring some other insights in as well, not just the CARES Act, but each week, again, we're counting on you. Give us feedback. I mean, please share with us in the comments, or send an email to support@georgiamanufacturing.com. If you've got topics that you'd like to get covered, if you got key things that we have not addressed yet, we want to make sure that we get those covered. Let me see. There is, we do have a finance call tomorrow at 10. So the events lineup is on Monday at 10 o'clock. There's a town hall that's open to everybody. We'll sort of get everybody caught up through the weekend. and what we've learned and what we've shared. At 2:00 on Monday is a task force call, and those are for anybody that's wants to actively get involved in this war against the coronavirus and play. We've got a lot more active opportunities to get engaged with this now that we got some clarity on our call this past Monday. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the topics vary. On Friday at 4:00, we have a Fun Friday. If you hadn't been on a Fun Friday yet, we'd really encourage you to schedule 4:00 to hop on those calls, and it's a real casual opportunity for us to kind of socialize and just get to know each other a little bit better. So that's sort of the lineup. And again, I want to express my appreciation to Russ specifically and the entire Taylor English Duma team to help with y'all support on these calls, to give us accurate, current, up-to-date information, because we all need to know it, and you guys are providing a fantastic service. I want to open it up real quick to Russ, and if you have any other pieces you'd like to share with us?
One of the things I wanted to mention is next week, what I'm hoping we'll have on the call are a couple of our experts in healthcare specifically. They deal a lot with health insurance issues, and I think there's a lot of questions around how employers continue providing healthcare insurance to their employees during this time. So they should be able to answer a lot of those questions, hopefully.
Okay. Fantastic. And again, if there's any other topics that we hadn't covered that you guys would like to chat about on the legal side, now's the time. Let us know what that is. The information that we covered today, again, the link back to the coronavirus page Mitzi's put together for us at Taylor English, it's available there under our resources tab. And then some additional documentation and information we're going to make available there as well. I think Mike's got some got a document he wants to share. We'll talk a little bit about that on throughout the week. So with that, guys, it's been another great day at GMA. Thank you all for being part of this thing. What my one request is, actually two, please go to our YouTube channel and follow us there. We have two playlists that are available. One is the coronavirus interviews. The other is the coronavirus town halls and roundtables. So all of these are archived on there. So if you would like and follow Georgia Manufacturing Alliance, follow us there on YouTube. And then once I post the notes for this call and kind of the recap on LinkedIn, my request is if you would just, like the post about the recap for today, and then make a comment on what your favorite part about today was. What was your takeaway? What was the most valuable piece that you got from today's call? With those two requests, again, thank you so much. I appreciate you being part of the day, and hopefully this information has been valuable to you. Been another great day at GMA, and we'll see you guys on the next call. Take care.
Thanks, Jason.
Sure.